What if I were to suggest that you play a key role in the awakening world? And that you are watching this because you have heard the call. We can start right now by opening our hearts and minds. Welcome to the awakening world.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I am Love Coach Scott Katamas. I'm your host. Welcome to the Awakening World. Spirituality, politics. You don't hear those put together very often, do you? More often you hear corruption. Just today, we had a United States congressman arrested on 13 counts, felony counts. So where does spirituality really play realistically in politics? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And I'm really impressed with the people that are joining us. This actually started with a conversation with one of my oldest and dearest friends, Richard Green. And you're going to learn all about Richard and our other guests. We also have Christopher Life with us. And you know him as Steve Bierman. You may also know him as Swami Bhyanananda. So all of these gentlemen are going to be sharing their wisdom on the topic. Now, I have to say that I got some attitude from people saying, hey, all white men on this show? And Omar Shah was quick to point out, now, most of the time our shows are all women, or mostly women. But I am going to play a pair of videos sent to us from Marianne Williamson. So we will get a little female connection, and hopefully Trish will be joining us soon. So I want to welcome all of you who are watching. And of course, it's great. I see that we've got a lot of our regulars in the Zoom room. Let us know where you are geographically. I see that we've got people from Ecuador, British Columbia, all over the United States. So let us know where you are. I also want to acknowledge those of you that are watching on our broadcast partners. We go out to well over 150 Facebook groups and pages via the Sign Network, S-I-N-E. Thank you, John and Summer Rimmer. And we also are now on Humanities Team. We are on Conscious Awakening Network, and a lot of YouTube channels. So wherever you're watching us, I want to invite you to come and join the Global Peace Tribe. It's really easy to do that. Just go to globalpeacetribe.com, globalpeacetribe.com, and that's where you'll learn all about who we are and what we do, and click register for the new season. That'll take you to our registration page. We do 3 or 4 shows every week, and they're all original. They're all featuring really incredible guests on important topics, like what we're seeing tonight. Can authentic spirituality mix with politics? Notice we're talking spirituality, not religion, which I certainly think gets in the way of true spirituality, but that's probably part of the dialogue, part of the conversation. On Saturday night of this week, we're going to be bringing a lot of the leaders from the Evolutionary Leaders Network onto the show and looking at what is your role in the Holo movement. The Holo movement, of course, is a very powerful and exciting movement that, as many of you know, I'm involved with. And we've got some incredible guests who are going to be joining us. And then on Sunday, tools for redignifying love. What does that mean, to redignify love? Well, come and join us on Sunday, the Sacred Sunday show, for that. So the advantage to joining the Global Peace Tribe is that you'll get the links to our Zoom rooms and come in. You can directly interact with us. And you'll get the links to our Zoom rooms all the way through the end of June. So that's quite a few shows between now and then. And that's where the dynamic dialogue happens, including tonight. We're going to want to hear from the people in our Zoom room. What are your thoughts about this topic? Your thoughts, your comments, and your questions. So come join the Global Peace Tribe. All right. Of course, when you think of spirituality and politics, most of us do think of Marianne Williamson. And it's been wonderful having Marianne on the show multiple times. I'm talking to her people, and we are going to do an entire show just with Marianne sometime in June. It might not be on one of our regular shows. It might be a special event where she's going to lay out her whole platform. So we're looking forward to that. But I thought, to get us off to a good start, I'm going to play a video of a prayer that Marianne did. And she did this when we were doing Saturday Night Alive with the Global Peace Tribe. We knew that the election of 2020 was going to be contentious. We didn't know who was going to win. And so we set up a special show. The election was on November 3rd. And on Saturday night, November 7th, we had our show. And we arranged for Marianne to be one of our keynote speakers, with the theme being all about unifying. And it was a very powerful moment for Marianne because, as fate would have it, our show went on at 6 o'clock Pacific time. And at 5 o'clock was when Biden and Kamala Harris gave their final, yes, we accept this is really happening, because there was a lot of contention there for a few days. And so there's Marianne, who's been on the same stage with these people, traveled with them during the early primaries, watching their great, glorious moment. And then had to come right in, and she was with us. And she did this opening prayer. Actually, I think it was a closing prayer. And she and I dialogued quite a bit. And afterwards, she and I spoke on the phone, and she talked about how important it was to be with us, because she felt like she was with her tribe. And it was an emotional day for her. So I think you'll see her vulnerability in this video. It's really quite beautiful. So here is Marianne. And as she leads us in this prayer, let's all drop in to the beautiful consciousness of what she's suggesting. And where are you, Marianne? Here we go.
I'm so grateful that this is a place where I can actually ask that you join with me. That's what we're doing here together, because we know that the most creative place is not just in the mind, but in the heart. And that has already been said here tonight as well. And so let's all take a deep breath and close our eyes. And see in the middle of our mind a little ball of golden light. And we watch this light as it expands and covers the entire inner vision of our mind. And into this golden light we step, standing in the presence and before the power of the great creator of all things. We atone in our hearts, not only on our own behalf, but on behalf of our nations and our world, for our lack of love. And in this moment, we are ready to begin again. And we pray for a great wave of forgiveness and purification to come upon all our minds and all our hearts. As we now gaze into a different and possible future, in which all are fed, all are nurtured, and all are loved. And we dedicate ourselves to that vision, to that possibility, to that reality. We pray to be used in our own ways assigned, that our hands, our feet, our steps, our actions, our thoughts, all that we have and all that we are might be used for a great rebirth. It is for this that we were born. It is for this and to this that we dedicate the rest of our lives. And so it is. Amen. Thank you so much. It was an honor to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne.
Much love to you. God bless you.
So many comments coming in. People just so inspired.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
In the event of a terminal day, I would turn to you. I would say, please help me. Help me see through this illusion. The tears would fall, my knees would bend. I lift my hands up to the heavens. Help me. Help me out of this illusion. My trust is in you, my faith is strong. I hear the call. It won't be long before sunrise, the light of a brand new day. I hear you say, give me total surrender. I'm coming your way. You came with me out of the mist, a violet's glow, an amethyst of beauty, never seen on earth before. I'll come with you into the light, my starry eyes are burning bright. I trust you, and now I know the reason why. I hear you say, give me total surrender. I'm coming your way. I need total surrender. There's no compromise. Total surrender. So come dry your eyes, have me total surrender. Whoa.
Look at his angel wings. I love it. I'm going to tell
Karen.
Me? Love. I don't see any. Yeah.
Thank you there very much, Omashar. And a reminder,
You are very welcome.
yourselves muted, please. We were hearing a little extra conversation from somebody in the background there.
We
Sorry.
did. It was Karen. I'm gonna tell on her.
Oh, was it? If it was Karen, then we get a.
But I managed to reach up in between chords and mute her.
Oh my God.
However, rewinding a bit, how beautiful and vulnerable from Marianne. Wow.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Hey, Karen. How beautiful. What a setup. Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, she was so vulnerable that night. Oh my God.
You could feel it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, speaking of beauty, Trish has joined us. Hello, Trish.
Hi, Scott. I love you.
You too. Now, where are you? You're in South Florida?
I'm in Fort Lauderdale right now. I just finished a weekend retreat with a couple, and now I'm teaching at the ESTA Festival in Tampa this weekend.
Oh, that's right. All right.
They're very salacious classes.
That's a different show. That's not the show tonight.
I know we're talking about politics.
And spirituality, is it possible? Do you think that spirituality and politics can come together?
This idea that something can't be spiritual kind of boggles my mind. Like isn't it all spiritual, Scott?
Well, there you go. That's definitely, it's all God experiencing itself. Absolutely.
But there's also, again, what I want to bring in is this idea that judgment or duality or taking sides is some aspect of spiritual. Like the way that we can show up in love and to bring spirit, and we'll say God or Jah or the universe in, is to really look at our judgments. And something that I've learned from you is to see the wants, needs, and desires that are underneath that, because that's really what people are wanting. You know, when I talk to some people who are really invested in a very particular side, mostly in the South, or even maybe my parental units, who are invested in Republican politics, I'm not listening to exactly what they're saying, but what it is that they want.
Mm-hmm.
What are they desiring? What's the curiosity under there? What are the needs that they're wanting to be met? And that is what I'm really listening for.
Beautiful. Thank you. I agree. You know, underneath everything, of course, including our judgments, are our needs and our values. All right. Well, I am going to get right to our guests because we've got three amazing gentlemen with us. And the first one is one of my oldest friends. This is Richard Green. And Richard and I have been friends for decades. And this show actually came out of a conversation with Richard. He said, you got to do a show on politics. And so, well, if we're going to do a show on politics, we've got to give it an awakening world spin. And so how can we combine politics with spirituality? And Richard has a quote. He says that politics are the greatest tool on the planet for spiritual evolution. And this is a man, Richard Green, who has coached presidents, prime ministers, celebrities, countless CEOs and companies. He even was Princess Diana's coach before her untimely passage. He's traveled all over the world. He wrote a great book called Words That Shook the World. It's a classic. And he goes on and on and on. I'm going to put his full bio in the chat box, but let's go right to Richard. How do we combine authentic spirituality with politics? How do we do that?
Well, thanks so much for having me on, Scott. And I appreciate and I'm excited by the fact that many people who are in the spiritual world do not like politics. They don't trust politics. They think it's kind of very, very geared into the duality world that they don't believe in, or at least in the same way. And so let me just summarize and say that my understanding of our individual spiritual path is for us to learn that we are God, that we are creators, and we do in fact create our own individual reality. Now, if you step back a little bit and make that more macro rather than micro, the exact same thing, in my opinion, can be said for politics on a larger level, that it is politics, which is the vehicle for large groups of people who in fact can create a new reality for everyone in the country and potentially everyone in the world. And there is, as I said in my quote, there is no faster, more effective, more clear-cut way to make that transformation than through politics. Let me give you one example, and then I'm so happy to have people push back on this and all of that, because I think you can learn a lot from having intelligent conversation, even if you're 180 degrees apart. So if you picked someone, a politician that you love, let's say Marianne Williamson, or Cory Booker, or Bernie Sanders, or AOC, and you imagined that there was a majority or a supermajority of those kinds of politicians who have a vision that you share about the environment, about war, about how we treat animals, and ending factory farms, and banning assault weapons, and creating economic opportunities for all people, whatever it is that your vision is, there is a distinct and not that hard to achieve possibility that you can get the magic number of leaders nationally and also statewide, locally, whatever, to do that. So for example, I would imagine that most people in this call believe that it is a woman's sovereign right over her body to be able to decide when or when not to have a child, right? That right was taken away by a Supreme Court. But in the 2022 midterm elections, we were 2 United States senators away from overruling the Supreme Court, reinstating Roe v. Wade, and immediately restoring that, what I believe is a spiritual sovereign right of all people. There is a magic number in America, and that is 270. If you elect 270, if you have 270 electors that are elected in a presidential election, you get the president you want. If you have 218 people in the House of Representatives who want to restore women's reproductive rights, want to have renewable energy, want to ban assault weapons, want to defund the military, I mean, whatever you want, 218 and it passes the House, 51 and it passes the Senate, and then 1 person in the White House to sign it. So at any given moment in history in our democracy, and a democracy is a mathematical concept, we are somewhere between 0, 1, 2, 5, 20, whatever, people away from creating a macro reality that would absolutely excite, thrill, inspire every single one on this call. And I say we focus on that, not on the personalities of Donald Trump or George Santos or Joe Biden, whatever. Let's be transactional. Let's create the reality that we want for all of us. And politics is an almost instantaneous vehicle to do that.
Wow. Well, that's a beautiful opening thought. Thank you so much, Richard. And of course, we're going to be hearing a lot from Richard, as well as our other guests. It's my pleasure to bring on our next guest. And you've seen him on many Global Peace Tribe shows before. But this is a chance for you to get to know the alter ego. Now, many of you know him as Swami. But today I asked Steve to be with us because Steve Behrman is actually an internationally known author and workshop leader, besides being a humorist. And he's been very involved in transpartisan understanding. In fact, he has a transpartisan podcast that we're going to learn all about today called Front and Center, From Political Battlefields to Cooperative Playing Fields. And he does that with his partner, Michael McCarthy. And we'll share with you more about that. And I know that Steve is actually a very, very smart guy. And so, Steve, I'm really eager to hear your perspective about the question of the day.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I actually did major in political science, believe it or not. I never got quite far enough in the field to actually dissect a politician, but that was my original field. And I've always been very, very interested in politics. And, through performing as a Swami, etc., I've gotten much more, I think, a bigger perspective, a more meta view. And I think one of the things I keep thinking of Martin Luther King, and what he was calling for was something that seems to be a longing in every human heart. He called it beloved community. Mm-hmm. And this has been kind of the aspiration, and we all know about the arc of justice. Most people, when we're watching movies, we know who the good guys are, we know who the bad guys are. But the problem at this particular time is that we live in a culture of separation that is intensely working toward that separation. And because we're so immersed in it, we don't see it. So we take that as that's how things are. But if you look at the ways that institutions are being run and controlled at this time, I think that, and Christopher probably will have more to say about this, there's more than 50% of Americans who identify as being not a Democrat and not a Republican. They want to be independent. There's something about these two parties that have somehow engendered our distrust for many, many good reasons. And so I think right now the biggest issue in politics is the battlefield itself, is the fact that we've been divided into these two tribes, and yet probably we have 90% of us have the same values at heart. The same values may have different ways, different perspectives of looking at them. But I think that our political system intentionally polarizes us so that we don't actually come together as a group and go, you know what? I think we're being hoodwinked by the same bunch of winking hoods. There's a moment that Gandhi had when he realized, it came to him that 30,000 British troops were ruling over 300 million people in India. And he went, what's wrong with this picture? How could that be? And that brings us to another Martin Luther King quote. Essentially, he said that when those who want peace are as organized as those who want war, then we won't have to march for peace anymore. And so I think what I'm getting to is that what's really required is coming together front and center above the battlefield, above the political battlefield, and recognizing the values that we have in common. And that instead of focusing on the identity issues that separate us, we want to focus on the identical issues that we all have to face. And let's use our political sensibilities, conservative and progressive, these two very valuable perspectives, and use them in a functional way. So that brings us to that sane and sacred center that we've lost. In losing religion as a center of our society, we kind of threw the baby Jesus out with the bathwater, so to speak. And so there is this ground of being, grounded in love, that most of us recognize, but in a certain sense, our mainstream culture that believes that only the material world matters is simply not acknowledging that. And so, the spirituality in politics is creating this culture of connection. Some wise man or woman once said that politics is downstream of culture. So what we want to do is use that inner peace that we've been cultivating and declare all out peace, let it out, and begin to practice that with the people that we see on a daily basis, and begin to live this culture of connection. And then that creates the field for the kinds of cooperative projects that people like Christopher are working on, bringing people together in functional collaboration.
Well, thank you for that. And as you just mentioned, Christopher is our other guest. And I've known Christopher quite a while, kind of from a different reality, and it's great to have him with us. He is a bold, independent civic activist, and he's dedicated to supporting the rise of the United States independent sector as a revolutionary force for our country through his organization, which is called United Independence. He's hosting an Independent National Convention event series, which we'll learn all about, and the upcoming Independent Civic Steward Leadership in Action program that's happening in August. He's a powerful guy. He's one of those people who's always been deeply mission-driven. And Christopher, it's really great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Scott, very much. Really appreciate the opening statements by our other guests as well. Certainly gives us a lot to chew on, a lot to build off of. I've had conversations like this, before, and I think that one of my favorite places to go with this conversation is to talk about the word politics itself. When you say the word politics, people so quickly kind of get this sense of all their connotations of the word, right? Manipulative, vying for power, deceitful, conniving, self-centered, greedy, these kinds of things. And so a lot of people have inadvertently kind of applied their connotations of the word onto the word itself. So when you say politics and spirituality, how can manipulation and vying for power and greed be synonymous with spirituality? But that's not actually what politics is. That's our connotations around politics for good reason. If we look at the word itself, then the word politics comes back to the Greek root polis, which is a reference to the place at the center where people would leave their own individual affairs to then come to be able to discuss the collective affairs and to be able to discuss their collective protection and the well-being of their livelihoods and the future that they want to create. And so at the heart of the word politics itself is this notion of coming together for collective stewardship. And so to me, politics is stewardship. And as I've kind of been on my own spiritual journey, all of us have been on our own spiritual journey that involves healing, that involves opening up my mind's eye, that involves expanding my perspective, that involves various different types of festival culture and plant-based medicines and all the journeys that can kind of lead to deeper philosophical understandings and perspectives and direct spiritual experiences and direct spiritual perspectives. The conclusion that I've come to is that all of that journey of opening the heart and healing the traumas and opening the mind and opening the throat and opening the will center and opening the crown and opening the root, that's going somewhere. And where I see all of that going is stewardship, that we're actually expanding our spiritual capacities so that we can steward better, so that we can actually leverage those spiritual capacities in the here and now, right? Because when the divine consciousness actually comes into form, that's the good stuff. That's what we're all excited about. That's the Corpus Christi, like coming into form in our tangible sense. And so when we can translate our spiritual notions into real material, tangible influence that actually improves the quality of life of ourselves and the people we share our world with, then that's when I see that our spirituality has actually done something meaningful and productive. And I agree with the points and sentiments that Richard is making, that our political systems and our governmental systems, at the core of it, like if we kind of break down all the connotations we have around government, at the essential core, government is the ability to collaborate at a massive scale, at the scale of 50,000 people in a city, at the scale of 30 million people at a state, at the scale of 300 million people. It's a context that enables for mass scale collaboration. And Barbara Marx Hubbard, as a personal mentor, I'm sure many people are familiar with her, and this notion of, we're all creators, and the future that we want is going to come about by all of us bringing our creative potentials and creative capacities together. And I do agree with Richard saying that government actually enables the potential of massive coordination so that we can actually be creators at a massive scale of tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and beyond. To judge that government and politics can't be profoundly, exquisitely, sacredly spiritual is to judge a 17-year-old that'll never be responsible, or to judge a caterpillar that'll never fly, right? Like there's a natural maturation process that happens in organic systems that brings things from one phase that's designed to be able to be what it is at the point, right? Because spirituality is accepting the perfection of reality as it is in a lot of regards. But just because how it is isn't indicative necessarily of what it's becoming and where it's going. And so that 17-year-old can actually mature up and become a very responsible contributor to the community. And that butterfly can go inside of a cocoon and emerge beautiful, and where before was a destructive consumer is now a beautiful pollinator. And so I see that government is actually hasn't even touched the potential of what it can be. And despite the fact that it is, in fact, in many ways, full of corruption, full of systemic challenges, full of incompetence, full of inadequacies, full of whatever complaint you have about government is completely valid. And despite the fact that it's valid, doesn't mean that we've seen the full potential of what it can be, and that government ultimately can be an administrator of a whole new era of humanity, where the systems and structures of government actually systematically improve quality of life for all as its prime objective. And it's our opportunity as creators. Like, if we really believe that we are divine creators, then let's take that all the way and say we're such powerful creators that we can actually create governance systems that produce something like paradise at a planetary scale. And we're not going to do that if we don't look at mayorship and city council people and county commissioners and governorship and state legislators and national legislators and president as real seats of creative power, and then pursue those seats of power so that we actually have ourselves more power to express our spirituality. I'll close my opening line with this quote that I think is really beautiful to chew on relative to all this topic, because power, this is not my quote yet, power is really the ability to produce a result. And love is the ability to enable other people to make the choices that they want to make in their lives. And so, laying down those definitions as I have them, I'll give you this quote, that those who love love must learn to love power as much as those who love power love power. Because when we can bring together the desire for liberty, which I would say is love, and the ability to achieve the result of producing a civilization that has liberty in it, and we bring those together, then we've married the heart and the mind, we've married the masculine and the feminine, and it's through that sacred union that something fundamentally novel can birth for humanity.
Wow. Lots. I'm going to bring Trish on. I'm going to read some comments that have come in. But, right offhand with what you just said, Christopher, I'm remembering that Jimi Hendrix quote, and this is paraphrasing, but something about when the power of love overcomes the love of power, we shall have peace in the world. Something along those lines. All right, here's some comments from our audience. Eleanor Joy writes, I appreciate that the speakers are offering ideas that have great potential. The time is coming. Susan Blomquist writes, this vision furthers Thomas Jefferson's writings, and that was in response to Christopher. Connie and Andrew write, great conversation. We believe that it has to do with a shift in consciousness to higher frequencies, where the laws are expanded and we are in a cleansing process through the polarity being expressed now for bringing emergent realities. And the last comment that I'll read is from Sylvia. She says, I served as an election official several times and then as an election peacekeeper, as a way to challenge the blatant takeover of the election process. At this point, I believe strongly we need a new way that, as I said above, focuses beyond humanity, but on the planet and on her beings. And actually, I'm going to add one more. Darina Joy writes, one of my favorite quotes on the subject of this is, the best political, social, and spiritual work we can do is to withdraw the projection of our shadow onto others. And that's a quote from Jung. Trish, we have a lot to digest. What stands out for you?
Has anyone read Emergent Strategy? I bet Christopher has.
I haven't read it.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, it's really a concept around creating strategies of politics and social change that are evolving. And the thing that I really appreciate that you said is really that there is this kind of corruption and those types of things there. Like, that's just what it is. It's an old system, an old way of being, an old way of thinking that hasn't really upgraded or hasn't really evolved from this archaic protectionism, right? And in politics, there's what I see, and this is just my opinion, what I see in politics is that there's people who are really wanting to create a world that works for people, that works in collaboration. And there's also this kind of old world thinking about how the world should or could have been. And then there's this place of the reality of managing large groups of people, like incredibly large groups of people. And how I understand it is that social norms are what creates aspects of shame. Like, we shame people to create social norms. That's what creates kind of like the system that keeps rolling. Like, that's how some of well, let's say the capitalist democracy sort of rests on. So as it's breaking down, things feel a little shaky because we haven't evolved the system. Does this make sense?
Yeah, totally.
So go ahead, Trish, go ahead.
So as I'm learning about emergent strategy, and I wish I was carrying the book right now, but there's a book by a woman who's, I can't remember her name, it's called When to Talk and When to Fight. And it really is about, it's about conflict resolution in the political structure. It's like when to push the agenda, like personal or like political agenda, and when to listen and collaborate. And I think that the thing that's missing in our political system completely is truly collaboration. The desire to collaborate and create a world that's just and loving and
yeah, I'm currently listening to Barack Obama's audiobook that he wrote, and he narrates A Promised Land. And just the fact that once he was elected, the Republicans, and I'm not making a political statement, I'm just talking about the lack of collaboration. The Republicans had only one agenda, and that was to stop him from accomplishing anything. And his incredible just frustration over that, and his efforts to try and reach across the table, to try and include a lot of Republicans he put on his cabinet, and ultimately Mitch McConnell just was able to get all of the Republicans to just do everything they could to stop him. And it was it's extraordinary that is the system. It is so incredibly dysfunctional. So I'm just curious if anybody has. It looks like Richard Green has a comment on that. You're muted, Richard.
Here's what people need to know. And Barack Obama had it completely right. Had Barack Obama not been blocked by Mitch McConnell and the Republicans, we would all have single-payer healthcare. We would have resolved the immigration crisis. Dreamers would have had a path to citizenship. We would have done much, much more on the environment. Assault weapons would once again be banned, and on and on and on and on. So the critical thing to understand, and I know this sounds very non-spiritual, but there's something I think very beautifully and importantly spiritual about being accurate. And I've followed politics for ever since I was 16. I was an intern to a congressman. I've run for Congress. I've hosted, 3 years of radio shows where I interviewed senators and Congress, all of that. The bottom line is that one party, the Republican Party, and I'm not casting judgment, I'm just describing what is true. Their guiding principle is, there's something spiritual about being accurate. Okay, thank you for picking that up, Trish. Their guiding principle is they do not believe in quote unquote big government. They do not believe in socialism. They believe in kind of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You got to work for it. We shouldn't be socialistic. We shouldn't be giving money to people, even to help them buy insulin, or even to help them pay for childcare, or even to help them pay their rent or buy food during COVID, a national emergency. So that's fine. I'm a Democrat in terms of I believe in democracy. And if the majority of the country wants that, then awesome. But what has happened, which has so irritated and discouraged so many people, maybe even people on this call, is this bullshit game playing obstructionism. Because the truth is, and I'm going to say this, and it's going to be a very provocative statement, but I've literally asked the former chairman of the Republican Party, the National Republican Party. I said, Michael Steele, Michael is a dear friend of mine. Can you name one thing that the current Republican Party proposes, what they want, what they're pursuing, what they're trying to get past, that a significant majority of the American people want? Just name one thing. He couldn't do it. So we have one party that doesn't believe in government as an answer to people's problems or challenges, and another party that does. That is the core of why Mitch McConnell obstructed Barack Obama and why we have so much division. So to correct what you said, Scott, it's not the system that's a problem. It's that we haven't gotten out enough, especially young people, spiritual people, people of color, who have more high frequency values to actually elect enough people to overcome that obstruction.
All right. So Christopher, Steve, it looks like Steve has something to say.
Yeah, it's really interesting what I'm seeing. I mean, I'm a lifelong progressive, a tie-dye on the wall progressive since I was a college student and so on. All of the arc of, the arc of justice, I'm with that. But what I've come to recognize over the past bunch of years is if the Republicans, as you would say, sold their soul to the devil, the Democrats have just rented theirs. So my point is that the entire system, being as corrupt as it is that everybody, until there's an intervention, has to play by the rules of the lowest common denominator.
Steve,
and so,
if I can interrupt with you on this, let's make this real.
Okay.
What is it that you deeply, passionately care about as a tied in the, whatever you said, liberal, that was a cute thing, but you are the comedian. What is it you personally care about?
What I care about is living in a society where there is individual freedom and collective well-being, where we actually are motivated from the inside out to collaborate, because as you know, when we work together, we actually are able to solve problems. If we take, for example, the abortion issue, the American people and a little wisdom council of a representative sample of the American people could work out the entire issue of the abortion issue to where abortion is legal. Most people want that. But the problem is that the two political parties are holding on to these narratives, and people are fighting one narrative against the other. And when people hear, I'm not a Republican, but I have friends who are, and if they heard what you said, they go, well, that's not accurate. I don't really believe that. I mean, but the point is that what we think the other side is a projection and a caricature to a certain extent. I know all about the Powell Memorandum. I know all about the Southern Strategy. I know all about Newt Gingrich's, war on what do they call it, war on America. I know all about that. But I'm saying that we have come to the point where we have to stop the arguing between the two sides and wake up and get people together to actually have conversations and solve problems. One side is not going to dominate the other. It's going to go like this until we destroy ourselves.
Steve, Scott, please allow me to respond, because this is the crux. Listen, I love your heart. I interviewed you 35 years ago. I think you're a real treasure. But what you're saying is actually not accurate. It's just not. And for example, you picked the abortion issue. I have in front of me, I spend so much time looking through the congressional record and seeing how parties vote. Virtually every Democrat in the entire United States Congress has worked as hard as they could to get a particular piece of legislation passed, which passed the House of Representatives twice. It's called the Women's Health Protection Act. It would overrule the Supreme Court. It would restore Roe v. Wade and abortion rights for all Americans. 218 Democrats voted yes for that in the House. Only 2 Republicans voted yes. 208 voted no. It's not a question of fighting. They simply don't believe what the American people believes and wants. So how do you fix that? The Democrats are doing all they can. It's not that they've leased or rented their soul to the devil. They're doing everything that the American people want as a majority, and the Republicans are blocking it. So the answer, I believe, is you just need to elect more people that actually were not being gaslit by the Democrats.
Okay, so I've come in for a moment because one solution might be what Christopher's promoting, which is, again, if I understand it, transcending Republicans versus Democrats and harnessing independence. So, Christopher, I'm segueing to you on this conversation.
Well, sure. I mean, I want to stay in the trajectory of the inquiry of this show, which is the correlation between authentic spirituality and politics. We didn't come into the show to be able to assess the moral distinctions between Republicans and Democrats and who's representing the will of the people. That's an important conversation, not necessarily the purpose of the show. I think that, but I think what we can draw from some of that last exchange is some of the principles that emerge through different spiritual lineages. The principle of being an observer, right? Not like being in the ego with points that have to be made and feeling a sense of kind of like egoic fragility that needs to defend itself, but actually, to keep the space open and to be in inquiry. And I think that one of my mentors, Daniel Schmachtenberger, who I know is a friend of yours as well, Scott, he talks a lot about the integration of diverse perspectives, right? So as one of the most spiritual things that we can actually do, because to be able to integrate 2 different perspectives requires first and foremost that you can set your perspective to the side, which is one of the single most spiritual things I think a person can do. And then from that vantage point, you can actually listen and integrate other perspectives. And then always, almost always, essentially, I'll say essentially always, when listening to 2 different perspectives, there's some synergy, some way that actually it's not a war between points, but it's what matters to me, what matters to you, what's the most salient, authentically true thing that person's saying, that I'm saying, and how can I actually put them together to evolve my perspective and generate a fundamentally new insight in this moment. And I think that the political leadership of the future that's going to kind of like create a certain type of magnetism is when people can actually see a political leader who can see 2 different perspectives and be the best synthesizer in the room to say, wow, when I hear that and I hear what matters to you, then it generated a new insight that I want to share with everybody. Does that feel like that helps to reconcile the paradox between that argument? And the people that are going to be able to do that effectively, I think are going to we're going to start optimizing for that type of the quality of consciousness. And so I want to invite that concept at a spiritual level, that one of the ways that we overcome the spiritual malnutrition that I think so many people experience in American politics, which is generated by a polarization, industrial complex that's just designed and engineered to be able to produce polarizing narratives and just kind of hit the same notes on the keyboard over and over and over again that are fundamentally dissonant, that lead us to believe for certain that there's a good side and a bad side. And if we only, fight on the good side and overcome the people on the bad side, then we'll win. Well, that dynamic is the same story that plays itself out in every relationship fight, Scott, and you know it, right? In the moment of an argument, I'm right, you're wrong. If I just assert to you more that I'm righter than you right now, then you'll cower to my rightness, and then I can feel better for a moment, right? So these dynamics play themselves out at all scales of human relating over the course of all time. So if we know that, then we have a fundamental premise of, at least, let's not unconsciously perpetuate these unspiritual dynamics of human behavior while we are exploring and discussing the spiritual future and potential of politics. And so that's kind of like what I would just leave as a muse, is that politics becomes spiritual when we are coming from a place of integrating diverse perspectives to produce fundamentally novel, synthesized insights in real time, and doing that at all scales, from individuals to communities to a nation and to a global community. And that's our journey, to learn how to do that actually, and what cultural protocols are required, what technological cultural protocols are required. And then if we're inspired by that, then it becomes very important to practice that as much as we can in all the contexts that we have, even when we feel so emphatic about something. That's the real moment in time to be able to say, how can I pick a piece of what you're saying and integrate it as something beautiful that's actually additive to my perspectives?
So, Christopher, the truth is, I was excited about getting on this call for the exact opposite reason of what you are. So perhaps we need to practice some of this spiritual coming together.
Let's do it right now.
Well, for example, in theory, I love what you say, but what's a spiritual reality that I want to create is to not have my fellow American citizens go to an outlet mall in Texas and literally have their face shot off. That doesn't feel terribly spiritual or ideal in my way of looking at the world. But the truth is, there are people, from my perspective, having been involved in politics, there are certain issues, right? And I love your all win, paradigm and all of that. I'm all about win-win or all win. But it's really clear that there is a very large percentage of Americans who would rather die than give up their AR-15s. And there's a very large percentage of Americans who legitimately, honestly, in their heart of hearts, believe that aborting a 7-week-old fetus is murder, and that the person who did the abortion and the woman who had the abortion belong in jail. So at some point, I think that the spiritual path is to honor the will of the country, the will of the people. And the will of the people on those two things is very, very clear, which is where people want to ban assault weapons and they want women to have the freedom of choice over their body. But that will never, ever happen unless more people vote to have their spiritual vision, their idea of what America could look like or the world could look like, implemented.
I want to turn over to Trish for a moment.
And I love how spicy this conversation is. things that I want to share. I guess I lean a certain way politically, and my parents lean the opposite. My parents are very much against, well, a lot of things. I'm not going to just share their political views. And I'll tell a story a little bit about, I was dating a man who had refugee status from Ukraine many years ago. He has struggled to get citizenship. And they were very against kind of immigration and border control and these types of things. And I was like, oh, and what occurred to me, and this is about the time when I started working with Scott. You know, there's a way to talk to people about what they want, and there's a way not to. So I used to approach it like just straight on, like just punch them in the face. And can anyone guess where that got me? Anybody else? Yeah, I thought so. Well, so it occurred to me after working with Scott for some time, and I was like, I actually want to listen to what they want. And my parents are incredibly poor. Like they're very poor. We grew up in incredibly low income in Montana, and they like poor, like low income, middle low income, and we, like, I ate a lot of boxed foods, and we were very scared about rent and all of those things for a long time. So what I've noticed is that when I listen to from compassion and understanding what they want safety. They want the understanding that they have something to lean into. And when I'm listening to the other side, which is the side that I more lean towards, and I was like, oh shit, they want safety too. And I was like, these strategies, the two different strategies to get safety needs met is wild to me. So then I talked to my parents from that place. They want safety. And it's about collaboration rather. And I understand that the age groups, the political structure as it is now, the way that it is done currently is the way it is, because there's a lot of different, we'll say, mindsets that are still controlling the way that things are seen or heard or presented through media. And it occurred to me a couple of years ago when I took a fantastic class at a city college. It was a political, not a political, was it a political science class? I think it was a political science class, but it was history. It was political history. And I was like, this is crazy. But he was the best teacher. And he had us really reading and debating things about how it looks to change the world with love. He was a fantastic teacher. And it occurred to me that it really is about not negating people's understanding or perspective, but really walking with them, regardless of whether they're on this side or this side. And I mean, hearing the sides and addressing if something is incorrect, but also being like, yeah, I hear what you want and how to go here. So with my family, we have gotten to an understanding that there is a human being at the edge of every decision politics makes. And I'm not saying that they've changed their views, but they have softened incredibly just by me choosing to go to here rather than trying to punch them in the face. Just a thought, just a second.
Thank you. You know, it's interesting to note how intense we can get when we're talking about politics, like noticing how a lot of the comments in the chat box were starting to get aggressive or intense. Certainly Richard, you know, has a lot of passion. And so I want to steer it a little bit into, quote, the spiritual direction, and a question for everybody, and I want everybody to have a chance to answer it in equal time. What is the best way, if we see ourselves as a spiritual being and we're wanting to live our life in a conscious way? This show is called The Awakening World. We're wanting to do an awakening. What's the value of getting involved in local politics? You know, there always is so much focus on national politics, but what about local politics? Or what about not politics itself, but social activism, right? Is that an especially effective way to do it? And so I just would love for each of you to offer, okay, as a spiritual being, as somebody dedicated to consciousness and awakening, what is a specific pathway that you have actually done? It could be social activism or local politics that has been of value, that has been worth your time and energy. And I'll bring up all of you and see, I want all of you to answer it, but anybody want to tackle it first?
I think that choosing to move into political office of some kind is incredibly important, especially for spiritual beings. Like, how else are we going to make the change that we want to see in the world if we don't put our bodies and our presence there? So whether that's through actively running for office or actively choosing to play the political game, lobbying. I mean, unfortunately, that's the reality of what our political system looks like now. I mean, and to choose to step into roles and organizations and activism, loving activism that makes change. Even just changing things for one person changes a lot of things. Teaching children.
Beautiful.
I'll jump in here for a second. Yeah. So, you know, any particular spiritual vow of service, you know, like the Bodhisattva vow or other spiritual vows that people might take along their way, ultimately need to translate into tangible, practical form. And I think one of the things that Richard and I very much agree upon is that, you know, it's not about meditating for love and peace and then not caring about how a municipal budget is spent, or not caring about how certain policies affect people in a particular area and limit their choices or enable their choices. And so, you know, I think ultimately local politics is a phenomenal context for people to get involved with and touch into, to translate their desire for service into something practical and functional. I do agree also, Scott, that there's, you know, a myriad of different wonderful nonprofits that serve humanity and social issues in wonderful ways. There's also, you know, self-driven community service that that people can activate themselves. And so there's a whole kind of scale and range of how people can translate their desire for all beings to be free, their desire for a lack of suffering, into some kind of tangible expression of that. And a term that I've kind of coined is this term, an independent civic steward. And this is an archetype of somebody who is not waiting for permission, is not necessarily following somebody else's game plan, but is trusting themselves and is stepping forward to take action to create a particular type of value. And an independent civic steward could create their own nonprofit, could become an activist or an organizer with an existing nonprofit, could run for office or support somebody who they believe in to run for office, could get involved with local policies issues or state or national legislative issues. And so I think that we are putting our values and morals into action is itself inherently spiritual. And just to kind of plug our upcoming program, our program is actually called Independent Civic Stewards. And so it's the perfect front door for anybody who's asking the question of, how do I get involved? How can I serve? How can I get involved with politics? How can I get involved with community service? And so that program's coming online. And Scott, you're welcome to share a link here or share a link in the future. But everyone's invited to plug into that. That's going to be a 4-month course that then rolls into an ongoing program. This is our event, actually. That's our launch event for Independent Civic Stewards. And so you can go to it. It's our LA event on August 12th through 13th. You can put in your phone number right here and opt in, and then you'll get all of our updates about our upcoming course and our upcoming events and other types of content. So thanks, Scott, for bringing that up. You can drop the link in But to kind of circle back around to where the conversation was at, it was kind of a bit heated and passionate with Richard, and then I'll kind of yield the floor, is that it's also important in that process to realize the real human paradox that it is actually okay for somebody to believe that killing a human being at any stage of development is morally wrong. That's an okay thing for people to have a spiritual perspective around. It's also an okay thing to be afraid that in yielding arms, individuals become more susceptible to an authoritarian militarized government that ultimately the people have no capacity to be able to resist. And that is actually also a completely spiritually appropriate and tolerable perspective. And so I think it's just very important that we don't subtly undermine or explicitly undermine how people actually have arrived at their policy positions through a morality and a spirituality that's inherently real for them based upon their entire lived experience. And so now how I take that topic and then tie this whole share together is, so as we are getting involved with local politics, I would say one of the single most critical things that your local politics needs is people who aren't taking sides as their fundamental premise of political leadership, is people that aren't saying, this is morally right, this is morally wrong, here's why I'm right about this, here's why the people that think this way are bad or wrong or evil, and here's how we need to defeat them and make sure we prop up the people that see this perspective the way that we do. And instead, to be able to be facilitators, to be listeners, as Trisha was talking about, to be able to maintain your position on, if you believe that having, automatic weapons is going to result in more people being shot, and you want to make that reality different, then to Trisha's advice, we're going to achieve that outcome, not by villainizing people who believe in automatic weapons, but by deeper discourse, deeper empathy, deeper discussion, and overcoming the convenience of just being able to get into kind of an argumentative style of political discourse.
Thank you. I'm reminded of the great Gandhi quote, which is, nonviolence takes a very long time. And it is challenging, and it is, as I've been listening to the Barack Obama audio, I've gone through another round of, oh my God, this is ridiculous. And so it's a tricky question of course, I'm a love coach. I'm all about discourse and communication and really seeking to understand each other. And of course, we're not going to get anywhere by villainizing and adding to the polarization. And I also can understand the frustration, I have it, that of obstructionist government, as opposed to, like you said earlier, Christopher, synthesizing. Abraham Lincoln, generally regarded as the greatest president, when he was elected, he filled his cabinet with all of his enemies. And Obama, when he became president, filled his cabinet with as many different points of view as possible, recognizing that he was young, didn't have as much knowledge, and he took Christopher's approach. He saw himself as a synthesizer. That was how he chose to lead as president, was to get as many opinions as possible, synthesize, and then make decisions, hard decisions. All right, Richard, and let's just try and keep it though to the spiritual aspect of it all possible, Richard. And you're muted.
Yeah, Scott, that's offensive to me, because I don't believe that what I'm saying is not spiritual. And I want to address what Christopher said, because it's very relevant. I am not suggesting that we vilify anybody or any point of view. Personally, I really am upset by abortion, right? But I've had to weigh that feeling of being emotionally upset by the process of abortion with honoring women's rights to take care of their body. I am not vilifying someone who has a strong personal belief that having 10 AR-15s in their garage makes them safe, because it probably makes them feel safe. And so for them, that's very real. I think that it's so rare to hear someone talk about things the way I talk about it, that I don't think people are putting it in the proper context, including you, Scott, with all due respect, and you know how much I love you. All I'm arguing for is that, yes, let's move towards a win-win-win, all-win scenario where we sit down and we talk like Trish was saying, to her family, and let's help them understand that they can be equally safe and feeling secure without a gun, or equally whatever. I mean, I think open communication is awesome. But as Scott was saying, and as Gandhi said, this could take a really, really, really long time. And it's exacerbated today by the fact that we now don't share the same facts. When Scott, you and I were young, there'd be Walter Cronkite and others on 3 or 4 channels. And now we have so many unique and different silos of propaganda. It's almost impossible to bring people together. And I think that's going to get worse. So my bottom line is I love the will of the people, that patriotic sense of democracy, that the majority of the people, the will of the people, not one tyrant, not a little clique or cabal because they can afford it, but the entirety of the will of the people should be able to decide what vision, what spiritual, emotional vision they want for the country and the world. And the only way to do that, as far as I know, is to elect people who share that vision and make sure that they have a majority to overcome the obstruction. One last thing, and then I'll shut up. I see a lot of comments in the spiritual community. Oh, you're for choice, but you're not for choice when it comes to my mandate. You Democrats are full of shit and you don't trust individual autonomy. And there are a lot of people who've been very disenchanted by that. But I want to share with you that what the Democrats did, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, with respect to COVID and the quote unquote mandates, is they have followed what the vast majority of Americans, perhaps misinformed, but the vast majority of Americans wanted. That's why they took the position that they did. And they are the party of the majority. And that's what I want us to do, is to have everybody collectively come together and let's move in the direction that the majority wants, and then move towards a win-win-win way of creating politics so that everybody feels like they are getting what they want. But that we're not there right now, and we have existential problems that can only be handled in the way I'm suggesting, as far as I can tell. And I love Christopher's vision. Christopher, I join you in that vision, and let's work on expediting that as fast as we can.
Beautiful. And I was not implying that you weren't spiritual. I just wanted to make sure that we were keeping it on the theme of the show. And I love your passion. And you're right. Let's not give up on our political system. Let's vote, and let's get other people to vote. And I agree with you on that. We haven't heard from Steve for a little bit. And Steve, you don't have to do this, but Christy Michaels wrote, I would love for Steve to share about the childhood that informed his Tea Party friend who he wrote a book with. So you don't have to respond to that. But
that's a long conversation that I think it's a spiritual conversation, but it's too long to put here. I think what I wanted to say most is that it's the battlefield itself that's the problem. That's where, people, what do people really believe? They believe often what they're told by the narratives that they buy. And the narratives are sold through fear, they're sold through polarization and so on. And so what people believe may or may not be true, may or may not be accurate. It may very much be the narrative that they're being fed. So the idea of what would it be like to come together above and beyond the political narrative. And I did have a political mentor, as Christy mentioned, Joseph McCormick, who grew up in a very, very, very conservative home. He was Army Ranger, Christian Coalition, et cetera, et cetera. And after being defeated in a political election, he kind of had a dark night, and he went to on retreat in a cabin in Virginia, and he got adopted by a band of hippies. And through this dialogue that emerged, he decided that his work was to reunite America. And he began to see that people from all sides had the same aspirations, but the divisions that were being programmed by that being intensified. I'm an equal opportunity masochist. I get the Democrats, I get the Republicans, I get them all. And they're all basically saying the same thing. Did you see what those bastards did? Send us $3. And so that's the level of the political discourse. And I'm astounded at how people that I consider intelligent somehow get manipulated by these fear-based, polarizing, blame, accusation, virtue signaling, all of these kinds of things that are clearly political manipulation. So I think that the spiritual aspect is to cultivate a space that's enough of a open space, enough of a loving space, so that people can begin to come together and rehumanize each other. Groups like Living Room Conversations, Braver Angels, the first step is to come together and actually be able to listen and be curious about the other person. Years ago, Trudy and I were buying a car, and it was right after I wrote Spontaneous Evolution, and the loan officer, the guy that was going to approve our loan, he asked what I did, and I told him I wrote a book called Spontaneous Evolution. And he said, oh, well, I've accepted the Lord Jesus Christ as my savior. I don't believe in evolution. Well, we had to be with this guy a whole afternoon. I'm thinking it's going to be a very long afternoon. So I asked him, how did you come to your faith? And he told a story about being a Vietnam veteran, severe PTSD, alcoholic for years and years and years, literally a gutter drunk. And he had this vision of Jesus reaching his hand out. And he took Jesus's hand, and that gave him his life back. It gave him his life back. And I'm listening, and Trudy's listening. And at the end of this, he starts sobbing, and he hugs us, and he says, "You're the first people who've ever listened to my story."
Wow.
So that's part of, regardless of what we believe on the field of beliefs, and Swami would say, what people believe is unbelievable. Whatever we believe on the field of beliefs, there's the field of the heart. And when Trudy and I have an argument, this is our ritual. One of us will say, it's time to get off the battlefield. And the other will say, but I wasn't done being right yet. And that kind of busts the human trance of what this is about. And when we relax into that, I mean, I understand fervent feelings. There are people on the other side, what Richard's on, who believe just as fervently and have as much evidence based on their spiritual perspective. But when you get these people together who are being nourished by a spiritual perspective, and you bring them together in collaboration. A colleague that I'm working with right now, Richard Flyer, put together a symbiotic network in Reno, Nevada, that essentially brought people together out of their silos to create a buy local network. Instead of fighting the big box stores, they simply created something that was more appealing. They had a local food network that transformed Reno's economy and agriculture outside of Reno. It's all based on Sarvodaya, which is an experiment that's been going on in Sri Lanka for about over 60 years, a network of village economies where Dr. Ariadne, who was a young teacher in late 1950s, began working with the poorest of the poor, the untouchables of Sri Lanka. And he brought them together to create agency, and as Christopher mentioned, people who are not let's say with the government or with a corporation or with a nonprofit. Ariadne was working on his own. He gave himself the agency to start this thing that now has tens of thousands of villages. And when there was the food crisis in Sri Lanka last year, it was this network of village economies where their slogan is, we build the road and the road builds us. That's what managed to feed all the people. They had people bring all of their food to the local early childhood centers, and they fed everybody from the youngest on up. Without government, and I agree, I think government has great potential. But before we use that potential, we actually have to change the rules of the game. Rather than focusing on this side or that side, what are the rules of the game that we're all involved with? What is it that really gives people agency so that their vote counts and that their vote is counted and that they're not gerrymandered out of their district? Most congressional races are already decided because they're so polarized. So government is paralyzed more by the partisanship than it is by by one party or another. So to get to the fundamental point, what happened in Reno, Nevada, which is what happened in Sri Lanka, is that by working together and cooperating, that was the extended spiritual practice in the real world that allowed that inner to become the outer. And they did it without an organization in Reno. They did it without a nonprofit. They did it without necessarily the government or any board of directors. It was simply bringing together networks of trust in these local networks, and then having people connect the good in the community. And I think that might be a vector toward spiritual activity in communities, is that people who really have these good intentions and want to be stewards and public servants, gathering together in these little clusters, little pods, saying, what is it? What are the liminal issues in this community? What does this community really need? What's going to bring people together? What is going to be something that we build that benefits each and all? And that's something that creates agency rather than being imposed from the top down. We can start doing it now. We don't have to wait. And those are the kinds of things that ultimately can influence policy. One last thing about Reno, just really quick. When they created their local food group in Reno, their buy local and their local farming group, there was a bunch of land outside of Reno that was going to be repurposed for development. After a year of this program of people supporting local farms, that all became farmland. And all of the lobbyists who were trying to turn that into development, they couldn't go anywhere because the public was so overwhelmingly in support of turning this into agricultural land, right? And it had to do with the activism, in that case, outside the political system, that somebody decided to do.
Thank you, Steve, for sharing that. Thank you very much. And one of the things that I wanted just to let people know about, I put it in the chat box. Steve has a beautiful YouTube channel called From Political Battlefields to Cooperative Playing Fields. And there's a video interview with Marianne, with Christopher, and with several other people that are really worth listening to. So I want to really strongly encourage people to check out that YouTube channel. Again, I'm putting it in the chat box for everybody. We're going to do one last round with our friends here, and also one last chance for them to express themselves. And I want to actually lead off with, go back to Marianne Williamson for a moment. And this is kind of, when you hear what she has to say, this was her thoughts about the awakening world. So I'm hoping that maybe Christopher, Steve, Richard, in your closing thought, you may address spirituality, politics can contribute to our awakening world. And once again, we'll go to our friend Marianne Williamson to hear what she has to say about that as kind of a way to get us going.
Of course.
Here we go.
A Course in Miracles tells us that the world is a dream.
And in our dream state, we have fallen into a nightmare. A lot of us think, well, if only we could awaken. But the Course in Miracles says you can't go from the nightmare to awakening. You have to go from the bad dream to the happy dream. The happy dream is the awakening world. We're in the process of awakening. The bad dream becomes a happy dream. A planet that is infused with so many warlike situations, people killing each other, atrocities, becomes a world in which war is merely a memory. A planet in which there is so much unnecessary suffering becomes a world in which there is no unnecessary suffering. A world in which 12,000 children die every day of starvation becomes a world in which all are fed, in which all have enough because we have used so wisely and compassionately the resources of this planet. A world in which laughter and love and song and forgiveness and dancing and merriment is the dominant human experience. Once we get there, once we're a happy dream, then we will awaken and we'll be beyond form altogether.
Thank you so much, Marianne, for your incredible contribution to helping us truly become an awakening world.
Thank you. It's wonderful working with you.
Trish, I'm bringing you up as my co-host. Any response to what Marianne just said or closing thoughts you'd like to share?
One of the things that I love Marianne's courage. You know, I heard a lot about how, I mean, we all heard the critiques on Marianne's platform and all of that. But I also just really want to appreciate her courage to step into politics with such a big heart. And we talked a lot about that, Scott, during this time. And that's the sweetness about her. I've never met her, but that's the sweetness about her and what you've shared. And I think it's incredibly courageous to actually choose to put your body in the line of fire for what you believe.
Yeah, and she took a beating. You know, I mean, here she was expressing what most of us were like, go Marianne, and the media, especially Fox, you know, tried to paint her out as just a hippie nut. And she put all of her time, all of her money into the last election, and God bless her, she's doing it again. And certainly we'll do another show dedicated to Marianne and supporting her. All right.
Just one like delightful fantasy that's just dropping into my brain. I'm like, oh my God, what if all the like tantrikas and hippie, beautiful spiritualists just got into office, and what kind of like delightfully pleasurable world we'd be. Yeah. Yes, I would like the fantasy that I'm playing into my head right now. Like,
Trish, you'll get my vote. You can.
Okay. Well, I'm not doing it. I don't think. I mean, there's other things that I'm doing politically, and organizations that I'm stepping into. But I think that they would eat me alive for some certain things that I like.
Well, you know how much I love and appreciate what you are doing in your social activism work. All right, we're going to go to my good friend Richard Green, who is a very spiritual guy. I just want to publicly state that. Richard, what are your closing thoughts?
And you said that because it didn't seem like that.
No, I said that because you had taken offense when you misunderstood what I was saying. So,
by the way, I think Trish just fucking nailed it. She nailed it. Imagine a political system where Marianne Williamson is like the most conservative person.
Right.
The entirety of the House of Representatives, the Senate, the White House, governor mansions are filled with tantrikas, experts, shamans in plant medicine, who have spent years meditating and experiencing a spiritual reality, and then having them be the ones to create the awakening world through the political system, heaven on earth through the political system. And it was funny that you played Marianne Williamson's thing, because my comment was going to be very similar. So here's how I want to leave it. the truth is, we are super, super, super close to having all the things that for me would be moving us closer to heaven on earth and an awakening world. One is we are really close to electing enough people to completely throw away our reliance on fossil fuels and have a beautiful, self-sustaining, renewable energy structure for the entire globe. There actually already is I'm a vegetarian, almost a vegan for 39 years. My friend Cory Booker, Senator Cory Booker and Senator Elizabeth Warren have sponsored a bill that would phase out all large-scale factory farms. Talk about ending cruelty. That's my spiritual vision. I don't want there to be any factory farms. We can do that. We can restore women's reproductive rights. We can ban weapons of war. We can enhance background checks so that only people who deserve or can be mentally stable enough to have a gun, have a gun. We can pass the Equal Rights Amendment into the Constitution, which would give absolute equality to all women. We can pass even more laws that would support gay marriage and trans rights. We can restore voting rights for all Americans. And we can even change our political system to ban gerrymandering so that never happens again, and to actually end the Electoral College and install one person, one vote, so everyone feels that they have individual agency to create the kind of spiritual reality that they would like in this country and in this world. We're so close, but it can only happen if people actually register to vote and don't stay home because of what the Democrats did to Bernie, or because the Democrats wanted mandates, or because Joe Biden's old, or this person's not perfect. Pick your issue, get involved, get the people who support your issue and your vision elected for mayor, for city council, governor, and everywhere else. And we can, in an incredibly short time, up-level our entire spiritual political system. Thank you.
Hey, I actually do want for you to tell us a little bit about your book, because you do have a book, E equals MC squared and the New Definition of God. And there's probably a whole other show, but tell us a little bit about the book. And I've got, oh, there it is. Okay, I've got it up on.
Well, hold on here. So I got that blur thing. By the way, a little Marianne Williamson story. I begged Marianne, I begged her when she was running to make her campaign about Jesus Christ and to have her be the person who was advocating for the values and the policies of this quote unquote Christian nation and the true meaning of what Jesus's words were. She rejected it, unfortunately. It would have really helped her. So one of the ways that we have a lot of disharmony is through our understanding of what God is. And it occurred to me that Albert Einstein's formula, E equals MC squared, was the most mathematically, scientifically accurate way to describe God that there ever has been. So I wrote a children's book, E equals MC squared and the New Definition of God. And I want to replace the word God with another three-letter word, awe, A-W-E. And this book is all about how E equals MC squared helps us understand the awesome, unimaginably magical power of God in a very, very scientific way. And it's for kids and also adults. And it's on Amazon.
Fabulous. All right, everybody. I put it in the chat box. Pick it up. All right, we're going to go to Steve for your final thoughts. Steve, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you for acknowledging Marianne and acknowledging Jesus. You know, I don't know how many people know this, but the inspiration for Gandhi's work, or a key inspiration, was reading Sermon on the Mount. So in a certain regard, what he was doing was, in a way, bringing forth, in his way, that kingdom of heaven. And I think that the way that we bring that forth is not through the political polarization way that we've learned how to operate, but through bringing people together above and beyond that, who have that vision in their hearts. I can think of many, 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 many conservatives, Republicans, or whatever, who have that same vision, who want to see factory farms eliminated. There's plenty of people. So there's issues that transcend the divide. So we can work together on those issues that transcend the divide and begin to build conversations for possibility and curiosity with one another. The other thing I think is a spiritual trait that we can bring to the conversation is creating enough love in the space to metabolize these shadow pieces that we have to confront. I'm looking back almost 60 years now to the Kennedy assassination, and if you want to call it PTSD, if you want to call it the reverberating trauma from that event, that's really fed so much distortion and dysfunction. I think we need a healing conversation. Maybe Marianne is the one to bring that kind of conversation to the fore, a healing conversation where the people of this country listen to one another and we trust ourselves. Like Richard was saying, the people should be trusted to rule, and we should be trusted to actually discover the whole truth together rather than buying either the red Kool-Aid or the blue Kool-Aid.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I have actually seen, I was 8 years old when Kennedy was killed, but it was such an incredible archetypal event, and it has shaped, I think, a lot of our, as we, come to, most of us believe it was not Oswald acting alone, but, something more nefarious. And yeah, there was a big trauma around that. And then a few years later, his brother getting assassinated, Martin Luther King being assassinated. The 60s had so much hope and promise, and it was almost like all of our favorite people were murdered. And it was, there is a lot of trauma around that, Steve. I want to just let people know a little bit about Join the Upwising. So tell us a little bit about this. I put the link into the chat box, but tell us about how people can join and what happens when they join.
Yeah, this is a practice that my friend Elaine Park put together and is done various places around the world, where people begin to focus on these 12 habits that are based on the Golden Rule. And as we begin to focus and practice on these on a monthly basis, we actually find that we've changed how we see the world, and we change how we interact with other people. So as Bruce Lipton and I said in Spontaneous Evolution, heaven is not a destination, it's a practice. So this is one way that, being in the world, we can practice this kingdom of heaven, this beloved community, whatever we want, this great vision, that the happy dream that Marianne was talking about. We can actually have agency and do this every day in our lives.
Yeah. No, thank you. And we're going to hear from Christopher. We're going to have an Omoshar song. And there's a rumor that we might close with a Swami visit. Do you think Swami might be available?
I think he might be. Yeah, he's not too far away. His higher plane has landed.
I love it. All right, Christopher, I have so enjoyed having you on the show, and I'm eager to hear what your final thoughts are.
Thanks, Scott. And thanks, everyone, for your shares as guests and for all the comments and the thread. It's really been lovely to be in this dialogue. Just kind of feeling like we're hanging out as friends this evening, getting to know each other and talking about things that really matter to us. Some of my closing thoughts here are, I think that there's something fundamentally spiritually significant about efficacy, about actually achieving impact in the world, about not just philosophizing, but actually bringing that all the way into form. I think that's what kind of the creative process is all about. And there's an interesting principle that I want to share that most people I don't think have thought about before, but I think it's worth kind of taking a moment with, which is that there's an ideal discourse that would happen in any society. And I'm not saying that this is happening in our society. There's a distorted version of this ideal. But the ideal discourse would be an ongoing dialectic, where on one side is representing what we know has worked, and the other side is representing what's possible, because just the what's possible is an ungrounded thought process that, like, all the tantrikas get into office that don't actually have the background knowledge of what's made the world work thus far is actually going to, unfortunately, fall short of the ideal. And we're going to realize that, oh, all tantrikas in office isn't actually the thing. And so when we have this conservative, progressive, left, right side, what we want to be looking for is who's educated and qualified to represent from the side of the conversation of what we know has worked well, and who's representing in a qualified way what is possible, and what's the dialogue between those two agents, and where they can agree is going to be the highest efficiency and the highest probability towards real efficacy and real meaningful outcome in the world. And so I want to kind of bring that together as a closing spiritual concept. And the other thing I want to mention is this notion of independence itself, because we have 35%, then 40%, then 45%, then last year up to 50% in Gallup polls identified as an independent, right? And what's really happening here with this is that people are realizing, I'm sick of being manipulated, actually. And that they're saying, not only is my identity a political independent and not a Democrat or Republican, but I want to think for myself. I don't want someone to tell me what I should think about something. I want to act for myself. I don't want someone to tell me how to act. And I'm sick of being controlled, whether it was my parents or my religion or the media or the political party. I am now wanting to be independent. And that itself is also a profoundly spiritual concept, because that's also implying that someone's more ready to know themselves. Know thyself is one of the first kind of laws of spirituality. And so I want to kind of paint the picture that this movement of independence in our country is really a spiritual movement of people that are wanting to become resilient against manipulation. And it's so easy to be caught in the manipulation process of the left-right polarized dynamic that that people are in the crossfires that long enough until they pop out of that system. And that's interestingly corresponds to us as a country declaring independence from what? From the controlling systems that have controlled our country, which is, in my opinion, not the Republican or the Democratic Party, but I believe that what controls the country is really the play between the Democrat and Republican parties, and that those that are declaring independence, 50% of Americans, to use Richard's reference to where's the majority of the country going, and how can we kind of align with that? The majority of the country is saying we don't want to be a part of either of the two main parties. That is the will of the majority right now. And so there's a whole kind of spiritual dimension to this political movement. And we use the phoenix as an icon for that. That independents are like the phoenix that are rising above the collapsing systems, whether it's the socioeconomic political systems or the systems of thought of right versus wrong thinking. And that independents are actually rising above that kind of mental construct into a whole new paradigm. And so, we just convened the second Independent National Convention, which is a national convention of hundreds of organizations in the independent sector. And we're very passionate about continuing to strengthen the political independent movement and make sure that the system has the kind of cultural integrity and the technological capacities and the resources and the organizing systems, so the independent sector itself on the go forward can actually outperform our existing two-party system, and through that vehicle of political independence actually set the trajectory and lead the political future of this country.
And I remind everybody that, I really encourage, if you want to hear more about what Christopher's doing, go and put your phone number in there and learn about what he's doing with his United Independents. I think it's a really fascinating direction. I hope that it succeeds. And Richard is giving me the finger.
No, I was not giving you the finger. I just had a little tiny thing. I wanted to ask you, Christopher, if we might collaborate on testing what you just said, because as I said before we even started this, I have a very, very, very different view about our two-party system. And I would love for us to do a little focus group, and you can pick the people that you want, and let's have a conversation and see what we can make out of that. Are you open to that?
Just send me an email with more details what you're asking about, and we'll go from there.
Great.
Beautiful. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate you both very much. And I also appreciate who's been patiently waiting, our beloved brother, Omashar. And I think after all this dynamic conversation, it's going to be very helpful to digest with some wonderful Omashar music.
Yeah. No patiently waiting here. What a great conversation. Spoken from true hearts. And I really appreciate that. And so let's just take a few deep breaths together. And let's mute ourselves, people, please. One I am has always been here, whispering songs of life and love. Calm with knowing our day draws nearer, calm with joy and endless sacred dancing breathes our heart song, and silent yearning keeps alive. A union blessed before beginning, and preordained beyond all time. Each step I take is one step closer to you, a joyous stride into the new. Each breath I breathe takes me inside your heart. Now I remember how to feel, and I remember how to fly. The one I am, fly. I am that I am, open to our sacred merger, shedding tears of divine bliss. And every movement tells a story, and nothing could compare with this. And here in fullest understanding, I'm breathing light through every word. Our lives become so undemanding, finally see finality heard. Each step I take is one step closer to you. A joyous stride into the new. Each breath I breathe takes me inside your heart. Now I remember how to feel. I remember how to fly. The one I am. The one I am that I am. The one I am that I
am. Let's all twinkle our wonderful Omashar. And Mark,
twinkle, twinkle, little star. Yay.
Bring Trish up for a minute here for us to kind of conclude. So any thoughts that either of you want to offer before we bring on Swami?
What to offer? There's already been so much.
I know there's been so much. I feel true hope through the way that we've been able to talk tonight, and the angles that it's come from, and the way we've all been listening. And I've had to stretch my angular listening to embrace it all. I feel bigger and greater and more grounded and more hopeful. So thank you so much, Richard and Christopher and Steve and Scott and Chris, of course. So yeah, right there.
All right, well, to wrap it up, he just came in from the higher plane. Is Swami Beyondananda.
Well, hello. You know, it has been said that crisis precipitates evolution, and looking at the current burgeoning crises we have, the chances of precipitation are about 100%. When it comes to politics, we have a new word. We have a situation. A situation. We have a deeply divided body politic. Half the people believe the system is broken. The other half believe it is fixed. And we've been divided into two tribes, red tribe Republicans, blue tribe Democrats, arguing about whether it is worse to kill the born or the unborn. Meanwhile, the Commonwealth has been stolen by a very small percentage of the uncommonly wealthy, and the bill has been sent to the not yet born. So what do? We need to do what the native peoples of this country used to do. We need to bring red tribe and blue tribe together to sit in sacred circle and talk until they're purple in the face. Because only by facing our situation as one purple people will the peeps outnumber the perps. We need to create a system based on identical issues instead of the identity issues. We need to recognize that each of us is all one with the same universal oneness, and yet each of us is totally unique, just like everybody else. We need a system that has unity, but not uniformity. Okay, Swami Beyondananda, namaste, and namasko. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Swami. That was beautiful. A couple of last announcements. For any of you in the San Francisco Bay Area, come join me tomorrow night. I'm going to be teaching a class on how to manage our emotions and triggers. And since Trish is in Florida, teaching along with me will be Lori Grace. We'll be doing it in Corte Madera. It's right off the 101 freeway. So anyone in Northern California, come join us. I know Roger is coming to join. I'm excited about that. So that's happening. And then on Saturday night, our show is going to be beautiful. It's all about the Holy Movement. We want to hear from you, what your role is going to be, and you're going to hear from a lot of our favorite people. Antoinette, Trish's dear friend and soul sister, is going to be with us. Claire and Mark Dubois, who are a beautiful couple and amazing environmentalists. Zenka Caro, we all love Zenka. And some friends that you haven't met before. Ramamani, Professor Alexander Schiffer, and Dr. Anna Lowe's Smitsman, all from Europe. And my co-host will be Deborah Moldau. And we will have music with Antoinette and Omashar. So join us on Saturday night. And then finally, the last show of the week, our Sacred Sunday show, is going to be kind of a fun combination. There's this amazing guy named Airy in the Air. He was referred to me by Daniel Schmachtenberger, who we spoke of earlier today. And he is just an outrageous guy. And Sri Ram has created some videos for us, just for us, for this particular show. It's all about what does it mean to redignify love in order to create ascension. Those are lofty terms. To understand what we're talking about, you got to come on Sunday. So there you have it, everybody. I recognize that there are a lot of comments in the chat box today, and normally I read more of them, but we had so many amazing presenters, I wanted to give them the field. But I really appreciate all the comments that came in. And I will put the chat box, I'll say the chat box, and I'll make sure that I send it out to all of you, along with the replays of this particular show. So thank you. Have a beautiful few days, and we'll look forward to seeing you on Saturday night. And let's go to gallery view one last time, where you may all twinkle each other and say goodnight. Take care, everybody. And thank you for all the people dancing. I love everybody moving and grooving to the music. Thank you for that. Good night, everybody.